There was an MIT study done in the 70s, 100,000 different scenarios, but the consensus was that the collapse would happen in 2040, societal collapse. The main reason is an inability to support an aging population. Rethinking loneliness, by the way. Marriage rates are at a record low, and the number of unpartnered adults is steadily on the rise. During COVID, something like 56% of everybody that was 25 and younger lives at home now, number one. Number two, we're seeing population reversals. What I wanted to get at with this is that this is something that we've actually been paying attention to when it comes to GDP growth, right? So when we look at GDP growth, guys, we're looking at 10, 20 years down the road. And one thing to keep in mind is population, aging population. The United States is finding that we are seeing a reversal in birth rates. Now, we did see a little bit of a rebound after COVID, but we were already declining before that. Immigration can help that. We're seeing Europe doing that with a lot of immigration. They're allowing a lot of more immigration to happen to help bolster up the population, to keep, workers and keep taxpayers and stuff like that. But the big reason is it's about taking care of an aging population. Now, are you guys all familiar with the MIT computer simulation that was done in the 70s that said that 2035 was the collapse? Aging population, not Asian population. Yeah. No. Okay, now I know where the collapse is. I said aging population, not Asian population. But in the Asian community, especially in China, the one-child policy. Okay, let me just draw it on the whiteboard. Okay, there was an MIT study done in the 70s. Now, we're talking about computers, in the 70s, which were much different than computers now, okay? But an MIT study, they took a supercomputer and they ran 100,000 plus scenarios, okay, of the world moving forward. And they accounted for population control, population explosion, population decline. They took weather patterns. They took economic collapse. They took war. They took 100,000 different scenarios. And they all had these different outcomes, right? It was like some Doctor Strange shit. But the consensus was that the collapse would happen in 2040. 2040 was the spaghetti line mean variable of collapse, societal collapse. Now, when they say societal collapse, they're not saying why it'll collapse, whether it's an asteroid hitting, or it's a plague, or it's just economic collapse, or it's just a return to the Stone Age, or Yellowstone blows up, whatever. As far as taking all the outside craziness happening, this was the general understanding of when. And the main reason is an inability to support an aging population. Now, why? Whether it's a lack of food, whether it's a lack of technology, a lack of whatever, but that generally seems to be where it's at. Those things came into play and basically said that we were going to get to a point where technology would get so advanced, people would work so much that they would have kids later in life, meaning their kids would have later, in life, or they would wait so long that they would end up being infertile, or they would never meet anybody, or they would never get a house, and then by the time they got around to having it, they didn't have kids, they're too busy taking care of their parents and grandparents, and yada, 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 and then we would thin out the population, and as the population thinned out, and you had all of these older people retiring, unable to work, needing to be supported by a younger population, but the younger population is getting smaller and smaller, meaning there's less people to go out and farm, and less people to go out and create medicine, and there's less people to, push advancements in whatever, and there's less people taking care of more people. How did this play out? Well, there's lots of things that played out the computer didn't put into consideration, but still ended up happening, right? And let's give you an example of China, right? The one-child policy. Now, China is not well known for making a lot of good population decisions, okay? We can go back to the 40s to the 60s, and we could do the Great Plan, which was a great communist plan. Communism took over in China, and they're like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to stop capitalism. We're going to stop this globalization, and we are going to focus on people farming for each other and taking care of it in a communal thing. 60 million people fucking died. Minimum. Maybe 100 million. Famines wiped out. There was no trade. There was no capitalism. There was nothing like that. Understand something, guys. As much as I won't defend capitalism, especially as a form of government, an economy that isn't capitalism can't survive. It's just not possible. China decided, you know what, our population's getting too much. We need to be careful. After this rebound happened, people do this. We need to have more control over our population. We want to curtail our population so that we as a government can have more control of the population. So we're going to put a one-child policy in place. And we're going to make 1 to 2 generations. We're going to weed it out. To where we get to a more manageable amount of people, because this country's so big, there's so many people. This is before high-speed rail and the connection of the world and everything like this. This is the 80s, guys, the 70s and 80s. This is before the world was so interconnected. And they're like, hey, we need to control our population, right? We need to be able to have control, because we're communism, right? Communism is government controlled. We control the people. We need to have less people. We need to be able to do this. So they're like, all right, let's cut this back. Therein lies the problem. You have, especially in Asian cultures, unlike in Western society, they take care of their family, right? Give you an example. My in-laws, right? They ended up having, in India, right? You'll have 2 people and they'll have some kids, right? And the kids will grow up in the home, and then eventually they get married, but they don't go off and start their own family. They stay in the home, have their own kids, and what they end up doing is taking care of their family who took care of them, right? A very good, solid nuclear family. And so they took care of their kids until their kids took care of them. And then they take care of their kids until their kids. And it was a thing that happened, right? Everything was fine. Then you have a one-child policy. Now, all of a sudden, you don't have 2 kids. 2 sets of grandparents, okay? Or 2 sets of parents who each only have 1 kid, okay? Now, the problem is that they all wanted boys, because if you only get 1 kid and you work on a farm, or you work in industrial, or you work in a society where women are not as desirable, okay, you want boys. Now in India, they actually made a law to where you couldn't get an ultrasound to find out if you had a daughter or not, or the sex of the baby before the baby was born, because people were just like wiping out the daughters. Let's say this one had a girl, right? Somebody who identified as a woman, okay? Fucking snowflakes. They had a girl, they had a boy, okay? But they only had 1 child each. So now these 2 end up growing up and they end up having 1 child. Now I want you to think about this. Because there's not multiple children here, that means that as they aged, these 2 came together and had to take care of 4 people and raise a child. But because they only have 1, this one, especially if it's a boy, ends up having to take care of their parents and their grandparents. So now you're talking about one person taking on the load of 2 to 6 people. Now you tell an individual that's 20 years old, that's in college, that's getting out, that they now have to go home and take care of 6 people. Maybe these guys are bringing in a little bit of income. These guys are completely off of the teat of making money. You now have one person trying to take care of 6 people. Do you think that person has time to go to the bar and meet a girl, or go online and go out on dates, or do any of that when they're working 12 to 16 hours? And same for the women too. If this was a woman, a man or a woman, it doesn't really matter here, right? They don't have time to do that, which means they're less likely to even get married or have a kid. Now, China was like, whoa, we fucked up and we wiped out all this generation, and now our population is declining. We have such few people being born with so many older people, and now the government has to come in and take it. We can't afford to do this. We need to start doing it. So they upped it. But guess what? They missed an entire generation. And so now the idea is you have less people taking care of more people. Meaning, inevitably, you're going to have less interactions, less dates, less marriages, less children being born, and you're going to continue to have that. We don't have as many people paying into Social Security. For those of you guys who are younger and don't understand what Social Security is not you paying into your future self. People are like, oh, I pay Social Security, and I pay in a little bit a month every month, and then when I'm older, I get to utilize it and retire. Hell no, son, that ain't how it works. You are paying into a pot that these people are taking from. It's a Ponzi scheme. I'm sorry, this is not a political take. The definition of a Ponzi scheme is Social Security. You're just taking money from Peter to give to Paul. That's all you're doing. That is a Ponzi scheme. The same as a Ponzi scheme. I'm not saying it itself is a Ponzi scheme. Okay, IRS, you're already up my ass for a lot of things. Fuck off, chill for a second. It's the same as a Ponzi scheme. The problem is that when you have an aging population and less people being born, you have less people pouring money into a pot that is having more and more people take out of it, right? This is part of why that study showed 2040 as being the end of society. And most of it had to do with with a population that couldn't sustain itself. And this is why there's a race between running out of population and advancements in artificial intelligence. This is where that crossroad is. Because right now we're getting to a point where we are more efficient with less. This looks like titties, and that's not what I meant to do. We're already becoming more efficient, right? 100 years ago, you needed like 5 acres, okay, of land. And you needed to till it, and you needed to plant it, and you needed to get cow manure, and you had to do all this, and you probably still only got at max 60% of the crop, right? And if there was a drought, if there was anything like that, it was 40%. And that's how you were able to feed people. Now, you have 1 fucking acre, you have genetically modified corn that can withstand heat and drought and floods and pesticides and everything like that, and you're pulling 80 to 95% per crop, right? You're more efficient with less. And now you have machines. Instead of needing 5 people to plant and sow and harvest it, you have machines that can do it, right? So we're in a race right now to develop technology that will help with the aging population without putting too much burden. So people often say, well, AI is going to take over and people are not going to have any jobs and not any money, so we need to have universal basic income or something like that. No. By the time our advancements in AI get to that point, our population will be much smaller. The only populations right now that are increasing at an exponential rate, these are the only regions, 3 parts of Africa and basically not Israel, not the Mideast here, not here, but basically Western Asia. And that's where a lot of these countries that are losing population are actually getting immigration from, because they're trying to refill the population. And that's not some kind of conspiracy. That's just how it is. Like Europe is opening up to, not just, people that are immigrating from war-torn areas like Syria, but from other countries because they want to refill that population. They want to keep population in line that they can continue to have people to work and sustain and to pay into the system and stuff like that. And so we're in a crossroads in this world. I mean, Japan has legitimately has created a minister of loneliness. Birth rates in Asian countries have just fallen off a cliff, especially since the introduction of VTubers and all that bullshit.